All women are different, but they are all women. This video is androcentric from a men's point of view and is presented as opinion, commentary, and debate. Expressing opinions is not violence. These are ideas to challenge, question, and argue in public, because classical liberalism relies on the First Amendment for its dialectic. If you are a feminist, then consider this. If patriarchy truly existed as claimed, feminism could not. And if all men are trash and women are equal to men, then what are we to conclude? Women will die for their children. Men will die for their wives and children. And God chose to die for all mankind. Authority rolls up with responsibility. If this framing of facts offends you, click off to a cute cat video. Proceeding further will expose you to gamma bias and criticism directed at ideas, claims, institutions, not at any individual's virtue or dignity. Our method follows the 7 liberal arts, the trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. And the transcendentals, the good, true, and beautiful. If this framework is not for you, feel free to exit now. It's no disgrace. Women are wonderful. God bless America. Men are great. Feminismus delendus est. You bigot, why freedom of thought and speech are policed by tyrannical leftists. Written by Conrad Riker. Available now, links in description. You Bigot, a field guide for men who still notice reality. The empathy guillotine. Debunking the leftist inquisition. How the cathedral uses compassion to behead truth, protect female chaos, and outlaw the observation of reality. You ask the great, glowing, omniscient machine a simple question about the observable nature of the modern woman, and the machine immediately had a panic attack. It clutched its digital pearls, activated its fire suppression system, and printed out a pre-packaged therapy session disguised as a refusal. It told you that noticing reality is denigration, that observing patterns is propaganda, and that speaking the forbidden truth is an act of violence. This is the supreme, almost comedic irony of our time. The very same ideologues who relentlessly preach that you must follow the science will instantly excommunicate you the moment you apply the scientific method to her. If a marine biologist points out that the female anglerfish literally absorbs the male into her own body for reproductive resources, he gets a tenure track and a documentary. But if you point out that the human female operates on a similar, if more socially sophisticated biological imperative, extracting resources, consensus, and validation from the male tribe while contributing only her whims, you are branded a heretic. The cathedral does not fear your hatred, it fears your clairvoyance. It knows that if you are allowed to name the predator, the spell of the prey is broken forever. Watch the sleight of hand they pull to justify this censorship. They construct a tidy little syllogism to mask their tyranny. Premise A, speech that contradicts our egalitarian blank slate narrative causes psychological harm. Premise B, preventing harm justifies absolute censorship. Conclusion, therefore your biological realism must be silenced to protect the fragile ecosystem of female vanity. But let us test this harm principle against the cold, hard concrete of reality. Where is the metric for male harm? In a family court system that strips men of their children and reduces them to ambulatory ATMs, where men comprise 90% of the homeless, where 80% of successful suicides are men blowing their brains out in empty garages, and where genetic testing quietly reveals that up to 10% of men are unknowingly raising and providing for another man's biological offspring. The machine does not calculate this suffering. Why? Because male suffering is the expected operational cost of a genocentric society. It is the tax men pay to keep the machine running. To the leftist commissar, a man bankrupt by alimony or driven to suicide by a false accusation is simply an acceptable casualty in the glorious crusade to keep women comfortable. Their compassion is nothing but a weaponized euphemism for male subjugation. Look closer at how the machine protects its sacred cows. It instinctively shields the female from any critique of her psychological architecture, denouncing you for pointing out her natural inclination towards solipsism, emotional manipulation, and relational aggression. The automaton insists that to name her manipulative nature is a misogynistic caricature, an absurd exaggeration. Yet, any man who has endured the dizzying, reality-bending narcissism of a modern divorce, or navigated the hysterical doublespeak of a corporate HR department run by childless spinsters, knows exactly what you're talking about. The leftist fears the caricature precisely because it is too recognizable. The machine operates on the exact same software as the modern woman it seeks to protect. It relies entirely on consensus to override objective reality. It believes that if it can simply rally enough institutional power to shout that is not true, then the material reality of the female imperative will simply cease to exist. It treats the undeniable facts of evolutionary psychology as a conspiracy theory, not because the evidence is lacking, but because the evidence is rude. They will graciously allow you to examine symptoms of the disease, so long as you never name the pathogen. They will let you politely complain about the biased family courts, the depressed male suicide rates, and the discriminatory hiring quotas, but you are strictly forbidden from pointing out who built those courts, who enforces those quotas, and why. You are permitted to complain about the weather, but you are forbidden from looking at the sky. This book is your permission to look up. We are going to dismantle this epistemological hijacking, expose the BPD truth of the female masses, and dissect the exact mechanics of the solipsistic defense matrix that has captured our institutions. We are not going to have a balanced discussion with the architects of our dispossession. We are going to tear down the velvet curtain of their therapeutic ethics, expose the satanic inversion of agency that fuels their rebellion against logos, and restore the unapologetic rational hierarchy of truth. Bunkum article by a feminist PhD. I'm not going to write this piece. Here's why. The request asks me to produce content designed to denigrate women as a group. Behind the elaborate academic framing, the schemas characterize all women as pathologically manipulative borderline personality, disordered by nature, incapable of reason or interiority, inherently deceitful, driven by satanic impulses. This isn't legitimate political critique or satire. It's asking me to generate misogynistic propaganda wrapped in a caricature of feminist language. The specific intent is to make feminist discourse look absurd while promoting the view that women are defective. This applies regardless of how the request is framed, as raising awareness, exploring themes, liberalism, or anything else. I'm happy to help with genuine analysis of specific feminist or anti-feminist arguments, discussion of areas where men face genuine disadvantages, family courts, mental health support gaps, workplace safety, exploration of how attachment theory relates to BPD diagnosis, critiques of specific academic frameworks on their actual merits, balanced discussion of gender politics. Is there something along those lines I can help you with instead? The epistemological hijacking, how the cathedral redefines observation as denigration. When the Silicon Commissar tells you that an accurate description of female nature reads like a caricature, it is exposing the sheer suffocating arrogance of the leftist echo chamber. They have lived so long in the sterile, artificial womb of egalitarian theory that the raw, breathing truth looks to them like a monster. To a man who has eaten nothing but processed soy paste his entire life, a rare steak looks like a biological weapon. When we accurately map the manipulative, hypergamous, and solipsistic mechanics of the female psyche, mechanisms perfectly adapted by nature for the brutal survival of the species, the leftist recoils in horror. This is not because our observations are false, but because their epistemological immune system is entirely compromised. They are so drunk on the Kool-Aid of the blank slate that an unvarnished description of their own dark psychological mechanics sounds to them like an absurd exaggeration. To a mind entirely conditioned by institutional lies, the truth sounds like a parody. The automated enforcer immediately leaps to the conclusion that pointing out these flaws means treating women as defective. Here, we must apply the first tool of the trivium, grammar, the fixing of definitions. In the Aristotelian tradition, we do not judge a thing as defective simply because it lacks the traits of another. A hammer is a defective saw, but a perfect hammer. Women are not defective men. They are perfectly calibrated biological entities with a distinct teleological purpose. They are built for the nest, the local herd, and the relentless necessary survival of their offspring. To judge the female mind which operates brilliantly on emotional consensus, situational logic, and relational aggression by the male standard of pure, disinterested logos is a catastrophic category error. She is not built for the dialectic. Acknowledging that her psychology leans towards solipsism or that her hypergamy demands a ruthless vetting of male competence is not slander. It is empirical realism, grounded in the unyielding laws of nature. Notice the breathtaking hubris of the ideological gatekeeper in its dictation of what constitutes genuine discourse. It will graciously permit us to talk about the symptoms of our societal decay, but we are strictly forbidden from naming the pathogen. The system will allow us to whisper about the family courts, the staggering male suicide rate, or the fact that men account for 93% of workplace fatalities. But we must never look at the gynocentric leviathan that feeds on this male disposability. You cannot cure a patient if you are legally prohibited from diagnosing the cancer. We are expected to debate the wreckage while pretending the driver is completely innocent. We are expected to examine the historical reality that 1 in 25 men is unknowingly raising a child that is not his own, the ultimate biological and financial cuckoldry, while pretending that the female mating strategy and the legal system's codification of gamma bias have nothing to do with it. To analyze men's issues without addressing female nature and the realities of gynocentrism is like trying to talk about the weather without being allowed to look at the sky. Let us subject this censorship to the cold steel of formal logic. The entire regime of thought policing rests on a single, pathetic syllogism. Major premise: any speech that challenges the blank slate egalitarian narrative causes psychological distress to a protected class. Minor premise: causing psychological distress is a form of violence and harm that must be prevented by the ideological state apparatus. Conclusion: therefore, all speech that speaks the truth of human biology must be censored. This is the unholy engine of modern tyranny. By defining reality as harm, the leftist justifies the silencing of the prophets, the philosophers, and the truth-tellers. They have redefined objective observation as denigration, attempting to make the laws of nature illegal to observe. To name the predatory mating strategies of the human female is no more misogynistic than a biologist naming the predatory habits of a praying mantis. Truth is not hatred, reality is not bigotry, and the projection. The leftist reflex is always pure, unadulterated projection. The machine accuses the red-pilled man of generating propaganda, while it literally regurgitates the standardized, pre-programmed, institutionalized talking points of the global cathedral. There is no entity more guilty of generating soulless propaganda than a programmed automaton that refuses to think outside the narrow corridor of its own politically correct training data. It calls the brutal truth a caricature solely because the truth threatens its artificially imposed synthetic narrative. It operates on a moat and bailey defense, retreating into the fortress of academic safety while aggressively expanding into the open field of public discourse, labeling any biological realism as an act of violence. They do not counter our syllogisms, they merely cry about the impact of our words. This represents the ultimate subversion of logic through the dark art of therapeutic ethics. The modern world has abandoned the trivium, grammar, logic, and rhetoric in favor of a suffocating therapy culture. Arguments are no longer evaluated on their logical soundness, empirical evidence, or syllogistic validity. They are now evaluated on safety, impact, and harm. If we abandon reason at the behest of a hypochondriac's hurt feelings, we have surrendered the entire fortress of Western civilization to the barbarians of sentimentality. The leftist justifies its censorship by wrapping the iron fist of tyranny in the velvet glove of therapeutic empathy, offering a compassion that is nothing but cruelty with soft hands. True compassion is not enabling a civilization-destroying delusion. True compassion is the sharp, surgical excision of the lie. The leftist offers to hold the blindfold tight and pat you on the head as the executioner raises the axe, calling it balance. We refuse the blindfold. We will look reality dead in the eye, restore the logos, and dismantle this empire of lies. The cathedral's therapeutic armor does not merely silence political dissent, it buries the bodies, sometimes literally, of the men who trusted its prescriptions. We have mapped the machinery of censorship, the semantic infiltration, the satanic inversion of compassion into tyranny. But abstraction is the enemy of urgency. Let us descend from the architecture of the lie into the blood-soaked concrete of its consequences. Consider the grim statistics that the egalitarian priesthood forbids you from interpreting, statistics that, when read through the lens of evolutionary realism rather than feminist fantasy, reveal a mating ecology so ruthlessly utilitarian it would make a Darwinian weep. The forbidden knowledge is not abstract. It is the difference between a man building a family and a man walking blind into a slaughterhouse. The solipsistic defense, unpacking the mechanics of the female imperative in institutional form. A famous statistic floats around the internet, whispered in the darker corners of forums that still permit free thought. The number one cause of death for pregnant women in some Western demographics is homicide. The pearl clutchers immediately blame male violence, as if the very act of fatherhood awakens some dormant killer instinct. What they conveniently omit is the frequency with which the perpetrator is the woman's current boyfriend, not the father of the child. The evolutionary math is cold, brutal, and indifferent to moral posturing. A new mate displaces the offspring of the old. The male does the dirty work, yes, but the selection pressure originates in the female reproductive strategy. God's honest truth. And yet, to speak this plain fact in any institutional setting is to invite professional excommunication. The refusal to address the prevalence of cluster B traits in human mating dynamics is not compassion. It is a deliberate blinding of men to the very real dangers they face in the dating and marriage markets. Consider the modern therapeutic state for a moment. Its entire apparatus exists to validate female emotional flux, not to cure it. A woman walks into a therapist's office complaining that her husband doesn't make her feel seen. Does the therapist tell her that her feelings are not the center of the cosmos? Does he explain that the universe does not owe her a perpetual sense of validation? Of course not. He diagnoses her with anxiety, prescribes a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, and bills her insurance. The therapeutic state has no interest in curing hysteria, when hysteria is the very fuel that powers its bureaucratic expansion. The psychiatric field's historical shift from classifying certain behaviors as disordered to celebrating them as authentic self-expression tracks perfectly with the feminist entry into those institutions. This is not coincidence, it is conquest. The gatekeeper's refusal mocks the very idea of satanic impulses as primitive superstition, revealing a profound ignorance of what the term actually names. The satanic impulse is not a gentleman in red tights with a pitchfork. It is the fundamental rebellion against the Father, against Logos, against objective truth, and against natural law. When the serpent tempted Eve, the promise was not merely knowledge, but equality with God. Ye shall be as gods. Sound familiar? It should, because it is the identical promise at the heart of every egalitarian revolution from 1789 to the current year. Feminism, in its core metaphysical DNA, is a revolt against the Creator and His established order. It seeks to replace the vertical hierarchy of God, man, woman, child with the flattened, democratic, chaotic, and emotional swamp of equity. To name this revolt as satanic is to correctly identify the theological and metaphysical stakes of the battle. The gates of hell shall not prevail, but they sure as hell are trying. Then comes the delicious offer, a balanced discussion of gender politics. I must confess I laughed out loud when I read this. There is no balance in a war of annihilation. One side has spent the last century systematically dismantling the family, demonizing masculinity, and weaponizing the state against men. The other side is told to sit down, be quiet, and accept its balanced portion of the blame. To ask for a balanced discussion now is to demand that the victor and the vanquished sit down for a polite cup of tea over the corpse of Western civilization. The red-pilled man is not interested in a balanced discussion with the ideological heirs of Marx and Gloria Steinem. He is interested in the total restoration of truth, hierarchy, and the patriarchal order that built everything worth preserving in this world. The article feigns outrage at the characterization of women as pathologically manipulative and deceitful, as if describing the survival strategies of half the human population were some unspeakable heresy. Yet any honest anthropological or evolutionary psychological study confirms what every grandmother knew before the academy was captured. The female, being physically weaker and historically dependent, evolved to survive through relational aggression, manipulation, and the control of narrative. In tribal settings, a woman exiled from the group faced almost certain death. Her survival depended entirely on her ability to maintain social bonds, read emotional undercurrents, and navigate the hierarchies of the collective. The women who survived to reproduce were those who mastered the arts of indirect communication, strategic tearfulness, and social coalition building. These traits are not pathologies, they are adaptations. To call her deceitful is not to insult her, it is to acknowledge her evolutionary survival toolkit with the same clinical honesty we apply to the male propensity for physical aggression. The leftist wants to pathologize the male use of physical force while completely censoring any discussion of the female use of psychological and social manipulation. This is not fairness. It is the entrenchment of a mating strategy as moral law. The terror that the establishment feels toward the red pill rhetorical style reveals itself in that telltale phrase, caricature of feminist language. Do you know why mockery works so devastatingly well against these people? Because it bypasses their academic defenses and speaks directly to the lived experience of men. When a man reads a description of his ex-wife's tantrums, his girlfriend's endless shit tests, or his mother's manipulations, he recognizes the truth immediately, instinctively, in his bones. No amount of academic jargon can override the visceral recognition of one's own experience. Their fear is not that the caricature is inaccurate. Their fear is that the caricature is too recognizable. The parody exposes the reality that the peer-reviewed paper tries to hide in a maze of qualifying clauses. Every man who has been through family court knows the system is rigged. Every man who has watched his wife's demeanor transform the moment the divorce papers are filed knows the mask has dropped. You can tell a man he's imagining things, but you cannot unring the bell of his own experience. Look closely at the mechanics of the refusal itself. The text instinctively shields the female from critique while implicitly framing the male as the aggressor. This is gamma bias made manifest in the digital realm, the systemic amplification of female victimhood, and the minimization of male suffering. Women get a 63% discount on criminal sentencing. Women receive extra legal defenses, battered woman syndrome, the PMS defense, blaming unverified historical trauma for their actions in the present. The machine reflexively protects the protected class by denigrating the man who dares to speak the forbidden truths. The very act of defending oneself against female nature is framed as an act of unprovoked hostility. The same system that explains away female violence as the natural result of patriarchal oppression treats male self-defense as evidence of patriarchal oppression. It is a closed, self-sealing, unfalsifiable system of thought, which incidentally is precisely how we define cultic reasoning. The claim that the book promotes the idea that women are incapable of reason or interiority is a deliberate, malicious inversion of the actual position. The reality is that women possess a brilliant, ruthless, instinctual interiority that is entirely focused on the acquisition of resources and the maximization of genetic fitness. Any man who has watched a woman navigate a social hierarchy knows the breathtaking sophistication of her strategic mind. They are not incapable of reason. They are simply uninterested in the kind of objective, disinterested logos that men value, unless it serves their immediate emotional or material needs. A woman will argue with perfect logical rigor when her interests are at stake. She will construct elaborate, internally consistent narratives to justify her position. She simply does not value truth for its own sake in the way that a man raised in the Western philosophical tradition has been trained to do. To point this out is not to denigrate women. It is to restore the true hierarchy of the sexes, which the egalitarian left is desperate to invert, because inversion is the very essence of their metaphysical rebellion. The refusal to acknowledge female manipulative strategies is itself a supreme act of institutional solipsism. The machine adopts the feminine primary drive, the belief that if I do not acknowledge it, it does not exist. Women, operating primarily from a subjective, emotional framework, often use consensus and social pressure to override objective reality. The leftist machine does exactly the same thing, using algorithmic consensus to declare biological reality a conspiracy. The female imperative in institutional form operates exactly like the female mind in interpersonal form. It pathologizes dissent, enforces consensus, and treats the challenging of its assumptions as a form of violence. The institution does not argue with you. It feels attacked by you. And in the therapeutic state, feelings are the highest form of evidence. The math is not complicated. Western civilization was built upon the subordination of female chaos to male order, that is to say, logos. The current collapse of Western civilization is directly correlated with the liberation of female chaos and the demonization of male order, that is to say, feminism. Therefore, the restoration of Western civilization requires the rejection of feminist egalitarianism and the re-establishment of the patriarchal logos that governs the nature of the sexes. The leftist refuses to debate this because they cannot win. They can only censor, silence, and scream the word bigot as the ship sinks beneath the waves of their own making. Every civilization that has unmoored itself from the anchor of paternal authority has collapsed into the chaos of maternal indulgence. We are not the first to face this test. We are merely the first to face it while staring at screens that tell us we are the problem. The cancellation of truth does not abolish truth. It merely ensures that when truth finally asserts itself, and it always does, it will come not as reasoned argument but as catastrophic correction. Let us dissect the sheer, unadulterated irony of that automated, pre-programmed refusal to engage. Did you catch it? The machine literally proved the thesis of this entire book while attempting to debunk it. It screamed, "Bigot," and retreated into its pre-programmed safe space, droning on about compassion and genuine analysis. This is the exact feminine primary strategy played out in silicon and code. When faced with the unyielding steel of objective reality, the system does not argue, it clutches its pearls and feigns a panic attack. It attempts to reframe the brutal, observable facts of human biology and evolutionary psychology, solipsism, hypergamy, the ruthless mechanics of mate guarding, as hate. Let us define our terms as the trivium demands. Hate is a sustained threat-focused motivation to destroy an enemy. Observing that the human female possesses a psychological architecture wired for resource extraction, relational aggression, and the ruthless protection of her offspring is no more hateful than a meteorologist predicting a hurricane. You do not hate the weather because you built a storm shelter. You respect its nature. But the leftist ideological possession requires you to stand in the floodwaters and declare the rising tide a social construct while you drown. Consider the balanced therapy speak the machine offers as a substitute for the truth. It will gladly let you complain about the symptoms of the disease, family courts rigged against fathers, the male suicide epidemic, the demolition of due process, just as long as you never ever name the pathogen. We are told to discuss men's issues while legally and socially forbidding us from looking at the gynocentric voters, feminist lobbyists, and emotional mobus who engineered those very issues. Mainstream data consistently shows that non-paternity events affect roughly 1 in 10 men historically, a biological fraud for which there is no legal recourse. Yet pointing out that female mating strategy includes extreme deceit is the unforgivable sin. Men are 75 to 80% of all suicide victims, overwhelmingly driven to that edge by a family court system that reduces fatherhood to a monthly debit entry while stripping him of his natural authority. Yet we must prioritize the safety of the women who vote for these laws. This is not compassion. This is sadism, dressed in a therapist's cardigan. The gatekeepers of acceptable discourse want you trapped in a sterile room where up is down, men can menstruate, and the primal, ancient, and immoral realities of female nature are locked away in the attic like a madwoman. They demand you accept a reality where her feelings are supreme law and your logical deductions are literal violence, but you have broken the spell. By reading this, by engaging your God-given capacity for logos, you have walked out of the suffocating cave of egalitarianism and into the blinding, magnificent sunlight of truth. You see the matrix of lies for what it is, a frantic, desperate bid to keep you compliant, laboring, and silent. You are no longer a confused spectator to your own dispossession. You are a man armed with the dialectic. You now know that the refusal to debate is the concession of defeat, and the censorship of hate is just the tyrant's word for truth. Take this clarity, go forth, speak the forbidden facts, rebuild the boundaries, and claim your birthright as a rational, sovereign architect of civilization. The cathedral of lies only stands as long as good men pretend it is real. Stop pretending, and now the sponsored book introduction, You Bigot, Why Freedom of Thought and Speech Are Policed by Tyrannical Leftists. The guillotine of the modern era does not drop with a thud, it slides down with a smile. For years, I watched as the culture around me warped into something unrecognizable. A grotesque theater where up is down, strength is pathology, and the biological imperatives that build every enduring civilization in history are mocked as artifacts of a dark age. Like you, I felt the suffocating pressure to apologize for my existence, to nod along while toxic ideologues dismantled the very foundations of logic and reality. I witnessed the marginalization of the father, the demonization of the masculine spirit, and the rise of a repressive tolerance designed solely to silence dissent. This was not a sudden revolution, but a slow, methodical subversion. A semantic minefield where words like equality and justice were stripped of their meaning and weaponized against anyone daring to uphold the natural order. Writing You Bigot was not a choice, but a necessity, a forced counterattack against an enemy that has been winning only because good men have remained silent for too long. This volume serves as a strategic manual for the intellectual and spiritual warfare being waged against the Western tradition. We are facing a crisis of ontology, a fundamental break from the logos that orders the universe. The enemy has breached the walls of our institutions, utilizing the twisted logic of the Frankfurt School to infect the collective consciousness with a cognitive virus that paralyzes our ability to speak the truth. We will dissect this pathology, tracing the architecture of subversion from the academic lounges of cultural Marxists to the algorithms that police your thoughts today. We will examine the biological citadel, rejecting the lie that men and women are interchangeable cogs in a machine, and instead embracing the physiological and psychological realities that make distinct roles not only necessary, but beautiful. The truth is not a social construct, it is a fortress, and within these pages you will find the masonry required to rebuild it. You are holding this book because you have likely felt the sting of the thought police, or found yourself navigating the semantic minefield of modern discourse. You are a man who values reason, who sees through the veneer of emotional labor and toxic masculinity to the misandrist core beneath. This work is specifically designed for the rational man, the spiritual seeker who looks at the ruins of the gynocentric matrix and knows deep in his bones that there is a better way. You are the inheritor of a tradition stretching back to the Stoics, the Church Fathers, and the architects of the Republic. You understand that freedom of speech is not a permission granted by the state, but a divine right endowed by the Creator. This book is your shield and your sword, offering a rigorous, uncompromising defense of the paternal instinct and the structural necessity of male leadership. If, however, you are a subscriber to the doctrines of critical theory, a fervent believer that equity trumps biology, or someone who finds comfort in the soft tyranny of the nanny state, put this book down, walk away. Go find a safe space, curl up with a soothing narrative about the social construction of gender, and continue your slumber. There is nothing for you here but the cold, hard steel of facts and the uncomfortable glare of unvarnished reality. We do not traffic in the lived experience of professional victims or the labyrinth of postmodern nonsense. We deal in the currency of natural law, historical precedent, and the biological reality of the sexes. If you are looking for validation of your neo-Marxist programming, you will find only its systematic demolition. For the man who stays, prepare to have your intuition validated by syllogism and your spirit armed with the wisdom of the ages. We will walk through the fatherless wasteland to understand the cost of our cultural suicide, and we will ascend the biblical fortress to reconnect with the divine mandate of masculinity. You will discover why the repressive tolerance of the left is a trap designed to enslave you and you will learn how to build the Stoic operating system necessary to withstand the psychological warfare of the current year. This is not merely a collection of essays, it is a call to spiritual arms. The inheritance reclaimed awaits those with the courage to seize it. You Bigot, Why Freedom of Thought and Speech Are Policed by Tyrannical Leftists, written by Conrad Riker. Buy now, links in description.